everybody, welcome back to Eggs. But before we jump in, I want to talk to you quickly about our new sponsor, Taylor Style. It's January, I'm knee-deep into launching a new company, my schedule's packed, and I'm spending a ton of time meeting new people. Conversations, coffees, dinners, rooms where first impressions actually matter. And honestly, one of the things that's made the whole process easier has been our sponsor, Taylor Style. Now, I'm not a guy who loves shopping or dressing up, but Taylor's made it incredibly easy. They send me pieces that fit, look sharp, and work across everything I'm doing right now, from meetings to dinners to casual conversations, all of it. I really can't believe how effortless my wardrobe has become. I don't spend any time thinking about what I'm going to wear, and instead, it's just back to business. I'm a subscriber right now, and every few weeks I get a box with hand-picked outfits chosen by a real stylist, refined by their AI, and the crazy part is they actually nail it most of the time. Stuff I would never go buy, but I end up wearing nonstop just because it works. What I like most is that Taylor Style gives me the right wardrobe for the moment I'm in. I'm showing up to conversations feeling prepared, confident, and aligned with what I'm building without having to spend time thinking about it. The clothes just support the work. So if this is a year where you're stepping into something new, a new role, a new company, or just looking for a new you, Taylor Style is a really smart way to show up. Eggs listeners get 25% off their first month with code EGGS at taylor.style. That's TAELOR.style. Once again, use code EGGS for 25% off your first month. And now, back to the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eggs, the podcast. Today's special guest is Cath Reohorn from Kind Copy, calling in from jolly old London. How are you, Cath?
God, I hope I'm not in London. I'm in Wales. I'm good, thanks.
It's all the same to us, you know.
Honestly, conceptually, London is like so far away from where I live. I live properly in the sticks on a beach in Wales. London's far too crowded for me, but I'm in the UK. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Cath, let's kind of kick this thing off from the very beginning. For people who don't know who you are or what you do over at Kind Copy, let's talk a little bit about how you got to where you are today and what you do.
All right, cool. Well, my background's actually in psychology. I was a psychology lecturer for 12 years and worked in schools and colleges with basically kids who wanted to learn how to get in touch with their emotions and feel their way through life, right? So it was an academic position. I got made redundant twice, and I was just over it. I just thought this is absolutely absurd that my career can be taken away. And at the time, I left teaching, I left academia, and I became self-employed. At the time, I was a personal trainer. And then COVID hit, and I took my business online, and I thought, wow, I have got absolutely none of the skills I need to do this job, literally zero. I couldn't even Google a good question. So I needed to learn about copywriting, I needed to learn about marketing, I needed to learn about sales. And on the gym floor, you just walked up to people and you were like, hey, bro, do you want to come and train with me? And it was always a yes, and it was easy. But online, standing out and developing the skills to actually connect with people and get them to trust you when you're a total stranger, zero, none of those skills. So I learned them for myself initially, never intended that to be my job, never intended to do that for anybody else. And I discovered that I'm actually way better at doing this for other people than I am at coaching them myself. And so that's sort of how Kind Copy came about. And at the time, I was working in the fitness industry, and there was a ton of like really nasty marketing. A lot of the marketing in the fitness industry is quite knife twisty and cruel. And I just thought, why on earth are we speaking to people like they're a bunch of degenerates? That's not the way to treat people at all. So Kind Copy was born so that we can take people who are already in a state of readiness to change and connect with them in a kind and dignified and hopeful and powerful way so that you don't speak to them like a bunch of degenerates.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and I think your psychology background is really unique too, because I think it gives you the opportunity to be empathetic, you know, and I've worked with a really broad range of people who are in control of copy over my life, you know, in agency and out of agency, everyone from I'm in college and they just asked me if I would do the writing, you know, to people who this is their real life career, right? And they've spent their whole life trying to be this, and they're English majors and they're literary experts and all these kinds of things, right? So there's a really broad spectrum in copywriting. And I think sometimes copywriters sort of get put down a little bit, like, and I see this as a designer as well, which is, especially now in modern days with AI and things like that, it's like, what is the purpose of even having that? I can copy and paste, or my mom writes good copy, or, like whatever. So it's like people don't really understand what goes into it. And I think that your background in psychology is unique among copywriters that I've met, but having that, I'm sure, gives you a little bit of, sort of maybe a superpower around empathy and being able to actually hear people's story and then act on it, versus coming from coming with the idea up front, which, I think a lot of people do, which is, I don't need to hear what you say, I know how to sell your thing, versus, maybe with having a psychology background, you're maybe more trained for, I can listen to what you have to say and let me reflect back what you're saying, and I think that, I mean, it's a kind of a nuanced shift, but I wonder if you've noticed that as being something that helps you in your career.
1,000,000%. Absolutely. I think the most important thing for any sales process, no matter what vertical you're in, is, can I make this person feel safe enough to even hear me in the first place? And I think that was missing, certainly in the fitness industry, but in lots of industries where you need someone to be collaborative in the process of change, when you're trying to get somebody to work with you rather than just take a pill or flick a switch. You know what I mean? It's very much a case of, do they feel safe enough to even ask you for support in the first place? And that's a huge psychology piece. The way you say it without being so nice that you're overly soft, you become a bit of a pushover, but without being so direct that people think, who on earth do you think you are? Trying to strike that balance between and I think kindness is that balance of directness and honesty without being overly soft, or, as I call it, a bunch of soft cocks.
Well, I think what is or stands out to me, or one of the things that I think is in that conversation, or that bit of bit of explanation that you just gave us, is that there's you really need to understand your audience, right? And so now, and I'll just use fitness as an example, and I'm probably generalizing, like I'm not an expert in the space, but looking at the stereotypes that exist in that industry, right? You've probably got some percentage that are the really small group of people that are the muscle heads that are going to react to ads that are a little cruddy, or speak a little more crass or whatever, and or a little more like go kick ass or those kinds of things, where the lion's share of people just want to feel comfortable at the gym, and they just want to know a place that they can go where they're not going to be judged or looked down on or whatever. And that, I mean, men and women alike, people have their insecurities. And so, I personally don't love going to a gym because I don't like working out in front of guys that are taking it way more serious than I am. And so for me, hearing messaging like what you're describing, which is, hey, I've tailored this to an audience that actually is getting broader reach, even though it doesn't feel like you're doing the traditional, let's say, gym marketing. The difference is that you recognize the audience, and you actually recognize the segment of the audience that's more important or bigger and actually pays the bills for these gyms. It's not really just the 10 muscle heads that never leave. And so exactly. I think that maybe that's a good point. And you mentioned, this notion kind of works across verticals, whatever you're doing, but this ability to identify an audience or pull out of a group of people the right audience and speak to them the right way. And maybe it doesn't always work like with the gym crowd where you're actually speaking to the majority, but it seems like if you have limited marketing spend, you have limited money to spend on these things, it makes sense to try and hit the most people with the best message you can deliver. And I think, again, maybe it's the psychology background of yours, but it seems to give you a nice edge on being able to identify, who are the people we're actually talking to, or what will resonate with this group of people.
Absolutely. And I think this is funny, right? Because back when I was a psychology lecturer, you'd have these open evenings, and the whole course would only run if you could get enough numbers in for your course. So you'd stand there and you'd pitch to the students, and you'd try to get them to sign up with you rather than something else that was maybe a bit more mainstream, so that you could get some funding and keep your job, right? And kids would come up and they'd say, what's psychology good for? And I'd say, well, any job really where you're trying to help people, where, you're trying to, humans or animals, where you're trying to help them and you're interacting with other people, and this is going to give you an advantage from this reason and that reason. And then I'd say, or I suppose you could use it for sales. And I saw those as completely different things. I thought, helping people and selling to people or marketing to people were totally distinct pathways. And when I started marketing my own business, I had to overcome that mindset around selling and marketing isn't helping, and it really is helping. It's helping in its most pure form. One of the simplest sort of hacks I could give myself at that stage was, instead of thinking about selling, think about helping. And that totally changes how you show up, how you relate to people, even how you speak to them through the process. And rather than sort of steamrollering them and telling them what they need, you're in this position where you are collaborating on the problem together. And it's actually a very beautiful idea. It's a fundamentally human thing to market and sell to somebody else, provided you're not trying to do anything unethical. And I think that's the rub right there.
Yeah, that's the catch. So, well, and it's funny because that's a big part of why I sort of moved away from traditional, I guess what you would call traditional advertising, billboards and these kinds of things, is I didn't feel comfortable any longer pushing things on people that they didn't need, and, from the perspective of our clients, they'd say, well, of course, everybody needs, XYZ or whatever it is we're selling. But to your point, this idea of selling versus helping, I think, started to become more clear for me. I don't know, it's probably been 10 or 15 years now. But there was plenty of years that I was just like, I don't know, we're just moving a widget. Like, who cares? Like, we just got to sell this thing, And so there's plenty of years that I spent doing, I guess, what I would think of as traditional advertising. And I think a lot of people are maybe now coming along to more like what we're describing here, which is trying to be a little more empathetic and being a little more helpful. And you're seeing this kind of messaging coming from ad agencies and stuff now, where they're talking more about, the human touch or how we get related to whatever, but it's like, for the longest time, it was kind of grody. And so I don't know if generationally, if the next group of, people coming up through our markets, our next group of consumers, I don't know if they're as sensitive to this stuff because maybe they expect it to be a little more kind and a little more, relationship driven than it used to be. And so for older people like me, like I'm constantly calling out, no, but we're relationship driven now. It's all about people. And it's like, maybe that's a given these days, but it's clear that there was definitely a delineation at one point where there was the stereotype of the sleazy car salesman, for example. And, and that type of sales was very little to do with help and a lot to do with buy my car because I need to make my commission. And I think that switch that you mentioned, this idea of moving from selling to people to helping people, I think is nuanced, but I think it's the right move.
I think there was definitely a time, right, when I first got into the industry from a fitness perspective, the common sorts of marketing that you would see were things like, if you're tired of being fat and ugly, join a gym and just be ugly. So it was sort of tongue-in-cheek humor, but it was taking a stab at people, I think, a little bit. And I think it peaked right after COVID, where you had this like return on relationship style marketing. But I think you're bang on. I think it did peak. And now, certainly in the fitness industry, I'm seeing a bit of a backslide. And I think it's because there's some fear in the market. I'm seeing a bit of a cyclical return to things like fake urgency, higher pressure situations. And like anything, it is cyclical. But I think we're starting to come back to a slightly more urgent steamrollering style of sales. And I don't know if you're seeing this across the board. I'm heavily in the fitness space, and I've got a smaller audience of creatives that are very uncomfortable with it. But maybe markets change at different speeds, but I'm definitely seeing it come back around to be a little bit more cruel than it had been sort of maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago, perhaps. Are you seeing that, Ryan?
Yeah, and I'm not super close to it, but I will say I have two teenage sons, and they're both, constantly trying to get gym memberships and things like that. And so I'm seeing the kinds of offers they're giving, and to your point about urgency and things like that. It's buy now, get in here, get your month free, whatever, and then they hit you with some kind of weird $60 fee, and I felt like they really kind of preyed on our kids, and we tried to warn them, but they ain't nobody listening to their dumb parents. Until they get hit with that $60 fee after 3 months or whatever. And then they're like, oh,
next time.
Yeah, now all of a sudden, now they know. But yeah, so there was a bunch of that kind of stuff going on. So I definitely agree that it seems to be getting more like that. And I wonder if it isn't what you say, which is kind of a little bit of a fear in the marketplace. It's a lot easier to work out at home these days. There's a lot more equipment that you can get in the house. Even in our house, we've got a little home gym. We've got like a tonal and a Peloton, and that kind of stuff. So there's really no need for us to go to a gym anymore, right? And if you already don't love the social atmosphere at a gym, which has kind of been my case, then I don't want to go. Now, for my older son, he's a former football player. He's used to working out with dudes. He likes being in the gym. He, runs into former players, that guys he knows from school and stuff over there and stuff. So for him, he enjoys it, right? It's a nice opportunity for him to go socialize and that kind of thing. So I think to each their own, but I think that, each of these places, these gyms, I mean, one of the things they're competing against is this home market, and I'll tell you, I mean, the amount of money we spend on Peloton and Tonal between each of their monthly memberships, it would be way cheaper to go to a gym, and so it's like, or at least your average gym, I'm sure you could find a fancy gym, but for your average gym, it would be cheaper to go there. But for me, I'm buying the ability to stay home and not go to the gym. And so, so for me, it's worth it. Right. So, but I'm sure that with the rise in that kind of competition and, just access to tools and things like that, you've got to make a more compelling case than ever that you should come use our equipment.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that. So one of the things I wanted to try and talk to you about, because I thought it was a really cool experience, was so earlier I guess it would have been end of last year. So just for people to give a little context. So I haven't actually met Cath in person. We've talked a couple times online here. We got sort of introduced through this guy, Mike Janda, who I've talked about before, but he's business coach, agency coach guy, whatever. And I went to his event in London, which is why I said Cath was from London. But I went to his event over there and got introduced to all these English people and I don't know what they call people from Wales. Welsh people. And so I made all these connections and all this stuff. So we started talking. And one of the things that Cath did for me that I thought was really cool, and I think it could be really practical for just about any business, is I was launching a new personal website. So it wasn't like, this big, deep website or anything, but I was launching a new personal site. And she had done a session for our coaching group that was about, copywriting and making sure, we had our messaging figured out and all that kind of stuff. And she ran a quick audit using her system for kind of looking over my website and giving me some critique on the messaging and stuff that I do. Now, I won't get into the kind of messaging and what she called out on mine, because there was plenty. But I wonder if you'd talk a little bit, Cath, about like when you, are encountering a new customer, or if somebody asks you for an audit like this, what are the kind of the top maybe 3 to 5 things that you're looking for in copy to sort of, I guess, qualify it as good copy?
That's a great question. Probably the first thing I will be scanning to look for is it clear who this is speaking to and who we're trying to attract? That'll be the first thing. The thing I'm looking at, the singular page, is there just one thing for the person to do on that page? So lots of the time, one of the mistakes I'll see is I'll put a bunch of calls to action in here so that if they don't do this thing, maybe the visitor will do this other thing instead. And it becomes a little bit of a mishmash and a muddle on what exactly they're supposed to do on that page. And from a marketing perspective, in the back end, when we come to analyze the data and the clicks and stuff, it's hard to know if that page is working because it's trying to do so many things. So number 1, is it clear who you're trying to speak to? Number 2, is it clear what you want them to do on that page? And probably number 3 is, are you aware of the sort of 80-20 on what's driving the activity on that site or on that page or on that social media like profile or whatever? Is there sort of a way that you are directing people to the next step? And those will probably be the 3 things that I will be looking out for, just to see if it's functional, if it's working, if it's attracting the right sort of people. There's a million and one rabbit holes that we could go down there, but that's probably the sort of like the high level stuff that I will be looking out for. I did an audit recently on a awesome lady's email sequence. So they'd gone through her website and they'd opted into this email sequence. But within maybe, I think there were maybe 10 emails in that sequence, there were about 7 different calls to action. And so this is so like dumb. I changed all the links to one link. And then she's like, this is working really well. I've made my money back really quickly on this sequence. I was like, well, yeah, now we're getting 10 opportunities to do that rather than 3 opportunities to do that. So we should have at least tripled the number of clicks.
Yeah. Well, what I love there, or what I think, a good point to pull out of there is that I think for a lot of us, especially if you're a solo operator or you're doing a lot of the work yourself and you're trying to figure things out, or maybe even you do have a small team that you're directing, it's really easy for us to kind of, I guess, get high on our own supply, or kind of like get into our own head about what we're talking about. And this was something that I was doing in my website, right? Is I was writing a website that I thought sounded good to a group of people, but Cath did a really good job of identifying, well, who is it you're actually speaking to here, And like, I've been in marketing a long time, so it's like, for me, I was like, oh yeah, no, I know what I'm doing. I'll just write my own words, and I can try and articulate this in a way that makes sense to me. And then, having a third party vet it was really useful for me. And so I think that, in the example of your email series or anything, it makes a lot of sense to have somebody on the outside. Maybe you don't have money to hire a team or somebody to do the work, but, minimally, have your mom read your copy or whatever and make sure that it actually makes sense. But Cath, when does it make sense to actually bring on a professional? And I mean, obviously, I think, sooner than later, obviously, but I think that what you just illustrated through the strip campaign is a really good example, or a really good point of why an expert is important, right? Because there's, I hearing you tell the story, I can go, oh, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense, right? Now we have one CTA instead of 10 different CTAs. And I think a lot of people, try and shotgun ideas and see what sticks to the wall and stuff like that, when really just committing to the one idea might be better. But having a third party that's objective say that to you can be invaluable. And so when do you think, whether, large or small or whomever, when's the right time to start engaging with people?
If you're looking for something like just an audit, having somebody read through your stuff, I would say do that day one, because you can probably get somebody to help you to do that in real life. And sometimes if you've really got nobody around that you would trust to, be more literate perhaps, or maybe be more objective, or be less in love with the words. That's something I fall into that trap all the time. I get so in love with the words that it almost becomes poetic rather than functional. Having somebody go through your stuff that doesn't really know what you're talking about and stop you anytime it doesn't make sense, that's useful. But if you haven't got that, simply just read your copy out loud. That is probably one of the simplest free things that you can do for anything that you write. And don't just think to yourself, oh yeah, okay, I'll just read it slowly. No, actually read it out loud. So you've got an idea of maybe runtime or sticky phrases that you might stumble over in the sentence structure. If you're looking to hire somebody to take it off your hands, I would say do that as early as possible that doesn't cause financial stress. Because any investment that you make in your marketing is you'll become ROI positive, but that money will be out of circulation in your business for some time. Be clear about when you need that cash back, so that you aren't tying up revenue in such a way that you think, oh, I'm panicking because it's now a week in and I haven't seen an ROI, or I'm a month in and I haven't seen an ROI. So that money's just out of circulation. It's not gone. Invest it as soon as you can afford for it to be out of circulation for a little while, and speak to the marketer that you're hiring and think, roughly how long do you think this is going to be out of circulation for? Not in a panicked way, just this is money that we can't redeploy into something else.
Yeah, no, I love that idea, this notion of being out of circulation. I think a lot of people look at hiring an expert, whether it's a designer or a copywriter or whomever. I think they kind of look at it as an expense, right? They're not even looking at the other part of the equation there, which is, theoretically, you'll get your money back. And so I think that that's a really clever way of talking about that, because I think that might take, at least for some people, might give them another way of thinking about it. It takes the edge off of investing in these kinds of things, because, theoretically, and I love your confidence. I think that most, competent people can probably help you get your money back in one way or another. It doesn't work if the economy doesn't circle back around. And so, right. Like if you hire a bunch of people and then you never see your money come back, like it's just not working. So maybe to that end, like what are the kinds of things that somebody ought to look for if they wanted to hire somebody that does like your kind of work? Because, like I mentioned at the top, there's a broad range of people who claim copywriter in their title. Yeah,
for sure. I think one of the things that I would probably be looking for is if I had a word of mouth recommendation, I would probably look them up. I'd Google them, and I would look to see, are you good at the thing you say you're good at? Because if you look me up on, let's say, Instagram, you might think, wow, this woman can't design anything. Her graphics are appalling, or her videos are terrible. Her video editing skills are terrible. Don't measure me on that. You're not hiring me for my ability to do that. Read my words, please. Do that. So see examples of their work. You might do it when they write for themselves or when they write for other people. Ask for samples of people in that same vertical if you can. But almost always, if you reach out and you think, hey, I'm looking to get some help with this specific part of my business, anybody who's got capacity to take you on as a client will almost certainly say, here's a quick Loom video. Let me give you a little bit of a feedback. You don't have to hire me for this. I can help you with that anyway. Almost everyone I know in this space is so ready and willing to help others. If you just ask them for help, I don't know anybody who I've ever sincerely asked for help with a specific problem that has been unwilling to help me. I think that's the beautiful thing about creatives, and two, the sincerely, genuinely lovely thing about the internet is the degree to which you have democratized access to cool people who've got potential to be your friend. So just ask them. They'll probably help you for free. And then if you like what they're about and you like their style of writing or their style of design or their style of website or whatever, then think about pursuing a relationship with them. But almost always you can get something for free,
Well, the thing that you just mentioned, there's a couple things in there actually, but one thing that you just sort of glazed by, but I think is really important for especially small business owners trying to decide what to do. You mentioned that they should approach somebody like this with a specific problem. And I think for a lot of folks, I don't even think they really know what their problem is. They'll come to you and say, hey, our website's just not converting, or hey, we don't have any traffic, how come, or whatever. And so I wonder if we could talk a little bit about that. Like if somebody comes to you and basically they've got, I don't know, nothing. They have a website up or something, but they're not getting any traffic. They're not getting anything. Do you have, I guess, sort of like a process that you would work through, or like where would you begin with somebody like that? Like it could be a low dollar engagement, a high dollar engagement, doesn't really matter. But just like, if somebody's got something online, but it's not getting any love, what would be your, starting place with somebody like that?
That's a phenomenal question, because a lot of the time I deal with quite small businesses that really usually don't even have a website most of the time. So there'll be a social media presence usually, but there isn't much more. So the first thing I would look at is to define the problem that we are trying to solve. And lots of the time people come to me and they say, hey, I'm going to need leads. That's usually the DM I get. I'm going to need leads. I'd be like, okay, have we got traffic? Is anybody seeing your stuff? That's the first thing. So I'd be looking for, reach, views, site visits, maybe impressions, possibly depending on the platform. Is anybody seeing your stuff? That's question number one. Question number two would be, of those people who are seeing your stuff, are you consistently sending them to the same place? So if the call to action, for example, is to DM a keyword or to click on a link or to read this article, whatever it is, are you consistently asking them to do that? So you've got traffic, you're posting regularly, you're asking them to do the same thing all of the time. At that point, you've got a pretty good idea of, is it an issue of not enough people, a quality of ask issue, or is it an issue of inconsistent, I'm just flooding you with a bunch of different stuff and I don't even really know what I'm trying to measure? Once you get to that point, we can pretty much be sure of where the problem will lie. At that point, we can start looking for nuance. So is there social proof on the site? Is there, are people beginning an application process? Which pages on your site or which topics that you talk about on social media tend to drive most of the clicks? Let me give you an example, right? I recently worked with a coach. He's in the health and fitness space. And he hired me because he was getting about 100 people a month start an application form in his business. But only about 20% of people were completing the form, and then they were trying to get them on a call. So it was something like 120 people would start, 130 people would start, only about 20 people would finish. So I was called in to fix that problem. I was actually removing copy. I wasn't writing copy for that. I was removing copy, and I was showing them more stuff before they got to the form. We took the completion rate from 20% to 71% just by removing copy. I'm actually going to write, I haven't done this yet, but I'm going to write an article about this on next Wednesday, just to talk about exactly what we did and exactly what we removed. That's probably step one of about 3 of optimizing that form. So then we had the call and we were like, if we look back on your last 12 months of business, and you tell me your worst month's revenue, if we'd had this system in place, then what would your revenue have been? So that small business went from about £28,000 a month on their worst month to almost £100,000 a month on their worst month with that one change. And that was probably one of about 3 things I was going to do to that form to try to get more people to actually complete it. So lots of the time, I used to think that lots of my value was I can write really good copy. But increasingly, I'm starting to see that it's less about the copy and more about thinking really clearly about the problem. And like you say, Ryan, lots of people aren't actually able to define the problem very well. So take time to ask a good question. And lots of the time, you might not actually need as much help as you think. I think lots of the time it's just about sitting down and understanding what's actually going wrong without having an emotional response to it.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I actually just wrote this down too. Because we had just talked about being able to identify a specific problem, but being able to give a specific ask, I think, is maybe the opposite or the inverse of that problem. Which is if you run a business or something like that, and we talked about this a little bit earlier with the email chain, but getting specificity around what you're actually asking. I think a lot of people, especially on limited budgets, feel this need, and I'm guilty of doing this myself, which is I only get your ear once. So by God, I'm giving you the whole dump. Here's everything, whatever you want. I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. Here's the 100 things I do. Maybe one of those will resonate with you.
Yeah.
And, and the discipline to whittle that down to one specific ask that's really going to, appeal to a specific group of people. I mean, sometimes you forget how big the world is, but there's a lot of people out there. And so even with a very niche ask, and maybe, if you can throw more budget at it, you can ask more people, ask more specific asks, but you scale up by doing more asks, not one message with more asks in it. And so I think by getting tighter around that, it's really good, and the point about editing, I think, is really big because a lot of times that is it, right? It's what do you actually say versus not say, I think is so critical when it comes to whether it's copywriting or video production or whatever. A lot of times the stuff that you leave in, if you had taken it out, the message would have resonated a lot better. And I think a lot of people feel like more is better when in reality, actually being a little more brief is probably better.
But the thing is, this happens because they don't know what this part of the process is trying to do. So everything they post on Instagram, everything they record on YouTube, every podcast they do, it's all trying to do everything, rather than thinking the responsibility of this piece of content is to get them to that website. Did they do it? Yes or no? So if you're working on this in your own business, the goal is to get to the point where each individual stage is only doing one part of the process. You're not trying to show social proof. You're not trying to sell them. You're not trying to go viral. You're not trying to, become a standout authority in your niche all in one post. You can do that, but it's really hard to measure the effectiveness of that post if it's trying to do 5 jobs. If the piece of content, the email, the ad, whatever, is just trying to do one thing, it becomes a yes, no, did it do it or not? So if you can't measure it in a number or a yes, no binary decision, you can probably afford to simplify what you're asking that thing to do and just take more time, take them through the process. You'll keep more of them than you think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's another one of the levers that we were talking about before, which is urgency. And I think a lot of times people feel like I don't have a lot of money, so I have to move fast. I have to get the most out of this that I can. So I need to tell them everything. And, basically all these things that come from sort of this scarcity mindset make you make all the wrong decisions, right? They make you bloat your messaging. They make you, invest in things that are crazy, or, you'll reach out to a broad audience of people who suck versus a really narrow audience of people who actually care about you. These kinds of things, you make these big, broad decisions instead of these really narrow decisions because you're just trying to do the most you can with the least amount of resources. And so maybe going back to that notion about, just putting that money temporary out of circulation, maybe that's a way to try and rationalize or come to this stuff with a little bit more of a even keel or a more like level head which is, okay, I'm going to take $500. I'm going to take that $500 and put it out of circulation for right now. It's going to come back 2 or 3 fold, like whatever. It's going to be great. But I'm going to take it out of circulation now. But knowing that that money is coming back to me, I can afford to focus in on a specific offer, try and sell widget A, try and sell service B, whatever it is that I'm trying to move, but I can try and sell just that specific thing. We're going to do, I don't know, heating and air conditioning, furnace replacements. And that's it. We're just going to market furnace replacements like crazy. We're going into the fall. People are going to need new furnaces. That's all we're going to sell. Now, we also do plumbing and HVAC and, all these other things, solar panels and whatever. But we're only going to talk about this really niche thing because that gets us the biggest bang for our marketing buck. And I think a lot of people think just the opposite, which is load up your messaging. So I love that. What do you think? So one of the things that, and again, I don't know, I spend a lot of time projecting on this show, I'm noticing. But so for people who hate sales calls, there are other ways to generate business out there. And for people like me, who generally, I do well socially, but I definitely have to get out of my bubble to do social stuff. Like if I was left to my own devices, I would just chill and not. And so for people who don't want to get on the phone or don't want to do cold calling, things like that, there's other ways of finding people. What would you, I guess, how would you guide somebody if you were trying to help them create another path to their business? And we talked a little bit about a couple options, email chains and things like that. But can we talk a little bit about just sort of building a funnel in the first place? I think that that's something that a lot of people just don't even do.
Totally. I think that can be an intimidating thought, right? For somebody who is doing their own marketing right now, who's writing their own copy, maybe doing everything, wearing lots of hats in their business, the thought of managing a funnel sounds technical, scary, and also quite inhumane, right? So all we're talking about when we talk about a funnel is I need to get in front of you. I need you to quickly appreciate who I am and how I can help you. So what you do clearly. Then I need to have a way to take money off you. Some kind of way. Some people will like sales calls. I'm very much in the camp of no sales calls. Then you got to do the thing you said you were going to do. And then you got to talk about it. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's the entire funnel. It can be as long or as short as you like. This could be, I post on Instagram, I offer you a thing, you slide into my DMs, I take a payment. That can be a funnel. That it can be as short as that. If you are finding you're getting a lot of people speak to you, but they're not buying from you, it may be that the funnel's a little bit short. So you can just make that longer. Now, throughout this whole process, you are in total control as the business owner of adding more friction or taking friction away. That's really the only thing that your marketing team is trying to do lots of the time. Add friction, remove friction. The more friction there is, the harder they have to work to get access to you. And by the time they do have access to you, the more sold they'll be. So you're playing with volume by making it harder. You'll have fewer people that are more pre-sold. That's all we're talking about. I personally hate sales calls. I get so stressed out at the thought of doing a sales call that when I was doing it in my coaching business, I would have people have the call and I would have to lie on the floor in the dark after the call and be basically non-verbal for the rest of the day. And I remember speaking to a mentor of mine at the time and I was like, I just can't go on like this. I can't run this business like this. I hate it. What have I got to do to never have to do a sales call again? And he kind of kind of laughed in my face. He was like, grow up, basically. And I was like, no, seriously, what have I got to do? He's like, well, I suppose you'd have to get really good at copy. So there I go. What's copy? I go on Google, what's copy? I'm like, cool, that's what I'll do then. Because I can't go on like this. I am trying to run a business on fumes. This is so energy intensive for me as an introvert with ADHD or a million other things. So that's not for me. So now, tactically, what I actually do is, if I post on social media, if I make an offer via email, I'll put the Stripe link as they can see it, so they can actually see the link. This is a Stripe link. I don't hyperlink it. That means that if they click on that link, they know they are going to be asked to buy something. And I'll say to them, this is a payment link. It's going to charge you this much money. This way, you haven't got to ask me any questions, And if you do have any questions, send me a DM, reply to the email first. I invite written communication, and I tell them, if you click this, I'm going to message you. If you click this, I'm not going to message you. I'm just looking to get information from you. I'm not going to pounce on you. So the lesson is, whenever you're at the gateway of maybe taking a payment, maybe asking somebody to trust you, opt in, whatever, tell them what will happen when they click the button. So when you book the call with me, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. It's going to take about 20 minutes. When you click on this link, it's going to charge you however much money. Do you get what I mean? So there's no nasty surprise. The reason people want to have a call with you is because they are uncertain about the process they're in. So the lesson is, tell them what stage of the process they're at, and then direct them to the way you want to be bought from or interacted with or whatever.
I love that. There's a couple of things in there that you said that I just kind of want to touch on or reinforce. One is this notion of adding or removing friction. So I think a lot of people just, if you're just thinking base, mentality around marketing, I think that everybody thinks the notion is you should be removing friction. Like, how do I make it easier for you to buy my product? But what I liked or wanted to elaborate on that notion about adding or removing is that, first of all, you're in total control. This is a lever that you can manage and you can decide more or less, and theoretically you've got so much business coming in, you need to add some friction so that you can, just keep things to a manageable level. What a great problem to have. But what I like about it too is you could use this friction as a way to create exclusivity, to create excitement, to make it just so, like stupid easy that they can just go right through and make a payment. Like, there's different ways of doing it, but like each of those different approaches is going to create a different emotion, right? If it's too easy, sometimes you go like, wow, where'd my money go? Now, what did I do? You're almost left like without a net. Like, you just let me fall through. That was so easy. Like, I didn't have to do anything. And then, other times it's like, man, I'm just trying to give you my money and I can't. Like, why won't you take my money? And so it's funny, but I guess I'd never really thought about it in the terms of, adding and removing friction, because I think the common version is, hey, let's try and make it as easy as possible. So I thought that was pretty clever. The other thing on
that point, Ryan, like, to interrupt you, sorry, is please don't think that the amount of friction that you will settle on now today is the amount of friction that you will always be settled on forever. As you have more or less demand, interest, leads, you may have to add and remove friction next month. This is a constant process. It's not like, cool, that's settled now. That's the right amount. This is a constant tweaking of the recipe. So if anybody is doing this themselves and they think, I thought this was done last month, I thought I'd nailed this, why am I changing it again? You do. That's normal. You haven't done anything wrong. That's a normal part of the process. Sorry, just wanted to
I think that's a really great point. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are that way. Like, especially if marketing's not their thing, if they're really, manufacturing widgets and it's like, well, yeah, but I got to tell people. So I'm doing my little marketing thing and I spend a weekend and by God, I'm getting it done, and then they feel like they're done and they're going to go back to their manufacturing gig and, they don't adapt or change or whatever with that messaging, then it can either be effective or not effective depending on how well they do the first time. And but I think that that's a really good point, because I do think a lot of people sort of want to set it and forget it and don't realize that marketing is actually something you're actively engaged in most of the time. The other thing I was going to mention though was this idea of hiding behind your automation. And so I really like this notion of, actually taking an email. Now I understand maybe at scale this doesn't work. You're some, Intel or something. You can't stand around and take every single phone call. And you need to automate some things. But I think a lot of people, especially in small companies, are looking for a solution, almost like in the example I just gave, which is, I just want to do my manufacturing, man. Leave me alone. I'm doing the bare minimum marketing. And so I'll set up this thing that will collect your names and email addresses or whatever, and then we'll reach out to you in our own due time, or we'll automate, here's an email you're going to get, and that's going to give the offer or whatever. And so, but by making yourself unavailable, for people who are having problems or having doubts along the way, you may be converting less. And I think for some people, especially in what I consider being a more relationship-driven society, or at least, around certain types of products and services that might be more relationship-driven, having a human being on the other end is great. And I actually think that as we proceed, and we haven't spent a lot of time on AI and stuff like that, so we can talk a little about that. But as we're starting to get into, this really high tech world where it's easier than ever to throw like an AI chat bot on your website or whatever, and the world is just becoming more and more noisy, and it will get much worse, I think. there's, I think, going to start to be a premium on human interaction, and you see this in things like, craft beers and beard oils and stuff like that. There's people that try and support small companies that do small things. And a part of that is this connection with that person. They like what I like, and we're talking about this thing together. And this is how you choose your influencers and stuff. These are the people that you follow because they're into the thing you're into or whatever. And I think that for a lot of people, especially if marketing is not your number one, you try and hide behind your automation by building some sort of, platform where you can just kind of let the machines do their work, not realizing that what you're actually giving up are the people who would become your, to use like the 1,000 true fans idea. I mean, that would become your 1,000 true people, or the ones that can actually reach out with you and shake your hand and stuff. Like, you don't need millions and millions of customers, especially for some small businesses or service-based businesses. You don't need millions of customers. You need 20 customers that love you to death and that will never leave you. So I think by hiding out behind your marketing, now granted, this can be a strategy too, depending on the type of work you're in, but I think that just the idea that making yourself available, I thought was a really cool idea. So as I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about AI. It's kind of the ugly sheep in the room, especially with somebody who spends a lot of their time doing marketing, messaging, and copy. It seems like one of the things that AI is coming after most rapidly, and so. But to the point I was just trying to make, which is, I think human to human contact is still going to be, or maybe will actually become the premium, and there will be more value put on that kind of stuff in the future. I think it'll actually end up okay. But I wonder if you talk a little bit about just like content creation in the new noisy world, trying to be more signal than noise. How do we know what's worth posting? When are we just contributing to the mess of stuff out there? Like, what kind of things should we be putting out on social?
This is a tough one because right now I think we're in an early adoption phase of AI where everybody is using it and they are creating a lot of stuff. And that is making a lot of noise in the marketplace because it's so easy to make a bunch of stuff. But the goal of your content is not to have a lot of content. The goal of your content is to have content that people actually consume. So how to know if your content is working? Is anybody reading it? Is it converting? Is it bringing you any money? Does it work? And if your AI content is, if you've got a big enough audience and you can crank out AI content that is actually bringing you conversations, converting, bringing people into your world, then it's probably good enough content. But in terms of, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I have recently, I'm going to tell you the truth, right? I have recently started unfollowing people on Instagram when I notice it's AI content because it's unreadable nonsense. It's so rhythmic. It's got that staccato style of writing. I think AI is awesome. I use AI every day. Let me preface what I'm about to say. But from a copy perspective, it's soulless. There's nothing beautiful in it. I haven't read anything in my life by an AI and I've thought, wow, you get me. Right? AI is a shortcut for people who can't be bothered to think. The value of writing is not that you have got a piece of content. The value of writing is that you have sat down and examined your thoughts in a way that humbles you. That's why it's hard. That's why people want to get an AI to do it. Sit down and write a topic. Write down a post today about something that you know really well, a belief that you actually hold, and sit down and write 300-word email on it. You would be no AI. It is so revealing how muddled your thoughts are, how challenging it is to express a thought clearly, to express the same single thought all the way through, to be persuasive about something that you actually believe. It's difficult. So the goal of the content is not to have a lot of content. It's to have content that you are proud of. Does it pass the pride test? Have you read it and thought, that's what I actually think, and I've communicated it clearly? And I don't think AI is great for that yet, but I do think AI is absolutely bloody mega for helping you to find patterns and things in your business, especially with numbers. I think it's amazing for that. I give it my Stripe data all the time. I help it to look for patterns in my sales process, but I don't love it for writing, just because I I don't want to read it. I've been unfollowing people, and I'm now down about 600 accounts in about
Wow.
since January the 1st.
Wow. And I mean, it may be, I don't know, maybe it's a little old fashioned to say something like this, but I think that there's something about being human that we don't all totally understand yet, which is, you know, there's some, whatever it is, call it this magic juice or whatever that makes us human. And, you know, at the end of the day, the AI isn't intelligent just because the name's in there, you know, just because they use the word intelligence doesn't mean it's actually intelligent. You know, it's literally just computer programming and, you know, predictive language models and things like that. Like, I mean, it's really just ones and zeros still at the end of the day. And the problem for AI, and, you know, maybe they'll be able to be convincing with this one day, or maybe someone will slip one by you every now and then. But I think what it misses is whatever this nuanced juju in humans is that it just doesn't have, because it can't exist in a machine. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's something too, and I think it is exactly what you're saying, which is when you're doing social content, especially if you're doing it as I hate that word influencer, but if you're trying to get people to follow you for your thoughts or your beliefs. And I think what people have with you, and I always use this example. I mean, I don't know, it makes me probably sound a little stupid, but when we were, you know, 2 or 3 years into podcasting, you know, we're trying to figure out what to do. We're trying to grow the show, all this stuff. And we had an opportunity, or I had an opportunity to go out to California and see this guy, Adam Carolla, talk. And Adam Carolla was, you know, radio guy, all this stuff. He's got one of the biggest podcasts in the world. I don't know how he is anymore, but, you know, but his show was really big at the time, and he was really popular in the podcast realm, right? So he had this podcast course, and you could go to this comedy club in California and see him. And so I went out there and I watched his presentation, and I used their tools, and it was really cool. It was a great conversation. And afterwards, they had like this little hangout session with him. And, you know, so you go hang out at the bar, and Adam was just kind of walking around mingling, you know. And I remember I went up to him and just kind of without even thinking about it, I just tapped him on his shoulder to like turn him around and be like, "Hey, Adam, what's up, dude?" You know, it's like, "Hey, it's me, your old friend, Ryan." And what occurred to me is, wait a minute, this guy doesn't know me at all. But by virtue of listening to a lot of his content, I have a relationship with him. Now, it's totally one-sided. And, you know, but I know about his kids. I know about his wife. I know about his, you know, relationship. I know about the cars he drives. I know about all this stuff because I've heard him say all these things. So I know him completely, you know, but he looked at me like I was crazy. Like, what are you doing? Why are you touching me? Like, who is this person? You know, and, you know, granted, in the context of a meet and greet, it was fine. And he was very gracious, and it was no problem. But I had this little realization there where it was like, oh, okay. So what I've done is I've formed a relationship with him, you know, whatever that means. And I've created this thing. And I think that's what we get with a lot of social media content, especially if you have people you follow. Like, I follow a lot of mindless stuff. I look at Porsches, I look at watches, I look at stuff like that. So for me, like, there's not that many people that I'm following because he's the watch guy. You know, there's a couple of them, but, you know, there's not a lot of those. And so, but I'm just looking at pretty watches and stuff like that. So I spend a lot of time doing dumb stuff on social media, nothing really that deep for me. But I think for people who are really engaged, you know, they have their favorite influencer or their favorite person that they follow for whatever, or, you know, I'm really into woodworking and this person does the best woodworking, so I follow their content, you know. And so you've kind of formed this relationship. And I think what AI is doing, or in the way AI is being used as the shiny new toy, to your point, is people are using this in lieu of actual relationship building. They're trying to just, you know, get bulk out, you know, they're just pushing out content. And I think what that's doing is screwing with our humanness, where you kind of had me fooled that we had a relationship and I was invested because I cared about your messaging and I cared about what you were doing. But now you've taken this departure where it's clear that you don't care that I cared about your stuff. And so it's almost like this weird emotional breakup almost with your influencers or with the people you're following online, because they've become disengaged. They might be posting more than ever, but they've become disengaged from it. And then I think as a viewer, you know, and maybe using you as an example, and you can speak to your experience. But it seems like the interest in following them, and I don't know, 3 times a week I talk about getting off social networks because I just, you know, I'm finding very little joy in my flipping. And so I'm just finding, though, as people, to your point, are starting to disengage, it's becoming less and less obvious what's true or real or what actually happened or didn't happen, because, you know, there's so much muck in the news and stuff like that, and then with AI, it's really easy to fake stuff and all this thing. So, I mean, there's like no trust, there's no, you know, relationship, there's no anything anymore. And so I think it's becoming, I don't know, for me, I think it's actually working against it, even though people think they can do more with AI.
I'm completely with you. Every single day, I have conversations with people who have built their businesses online. And every single day, they're telling me, if it wasn't for my business, I would not have a social media account. I hate this. Why on earth are we doing stuff that we hate? Please notice the next time you're on social media and you're scrolling through something and pay attention to the moment, the instant you realize you are reading AI. And pay attention to the way that your whole body is now. You go from, I was engaged and interested in what you had to say, and now I've just powered down completely. Notice what is happening to you in your body when you read that stuff. Because my reaction is, you couldn't be bothered to write it. And it was something that you wanted to say. So I can't be bothered to read it. And then people wonder why my audience is disengaged. I can't get anybody to reply to me. I can't get anybody to have a conversation with me online. And then you look at the content and you think, well, yeah, it looks like you couldn't be asked with it. So, Of course they can't be bothered to engage with you. But on a purely visceral level, notice the instant you recognize this is not human written, and how your interest switches off like that, like a switch, and tell me that AI is not problematic in people's businesses. I think AI is amazing. What incredible tool. I can't believe how exciting it is to be alive in an age of AI. But as a tool for connection, appalling. Dangerous.
I think you're right.
Actually, people are so disengaged with the process now.
Yeah, I think you're so right. Well, so as we're starting to get to the end here, I wanted to just kind of ask you for one last little thing, which is kind of, I don't know, if we were going to give people one little leave behind, or, maybe offer up one little bit of free advice, what would be the one channel that you would bet that people should bet on or spend more time in 2026? And that channel could be email marketing, it could be LinkedIn, it could be Instagram, it could be whatever. But like, where do you think people, especially, if we're talking to a group of startup founders and people, have limited marketing budgets, where would you say is the best time or best place to invest your energy, your information?
I would advise someone to pay attention to what energizes them and where you can actually genuinely show up without too significant a spend. Putting your message into the world should not feel like a particularly energy intensive thing. This should never feel like more than a 3 out of 10 on the effort scale. So if you're an amazing podcaster and you speak well, do podcasts. If you prefer to write and you're a bit more introverted and you prefer to do things behind the keyboard, do that. Whatever format allows you to show up consistently and get someone to spend more time with you, invest heavily in that, but pay attention to your energy levels and your how up for it you are when you think about sitting down to create content. If I sit down to create video content, my energy level is a 0. When I sit down to write an article or an email or something in writing, 10, I'm ready to go. We can run through walls all day long. So what works well for you, and there's always room for your personal preference and taste. What can I do that doesn't feel like too labor intensive for me?
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I think that's I just underlined the word consistency here. And that seems to be the biggest thing. It's where can you show up with the least amount of friction, where you enjoy what you're doing. It doesn't feel like too much pain or whatever, because whatever it is that's working for you, that'll be the thing that works best for you. So totally. As we wrap up here, Cath, where can people find you online? Where can they track down or engage your content? How can they get in touch?
Well, I always like to give a very specific freebie for the audience. So I will send you a link over for that, Ryan. But if you just want to stop by my Instagram and say hi, you can find me at KindCopyUK. I've got longer form articles on Substack. I've got other podcasts I can direct you to, but I wouldn't make any assumptions. Stop by, say hi, and I will tailor something to whatever you need.
I love that. Well, thanks so much, Cath. This has been awesome. I'm really glad we were able to finally connect and get this to happen. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know it's getting towards your afternoon or evening, so I appreciate you making the time for us.
Thanks for having me on, mate. This was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.